definitely comes back to screenwriting, because when I sit down to write a campaign for a client, one of the first things that I'm thinking of is sort of drawing a scene, creating a scene and a framework of, okay, this prospect that I want to reach is standing across the room from me. We're at a networking party. How do I start that conversation? What would that sound like?
This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 362, From Screenwriting to Email Campaigns, an interview with Zach Gutin.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. And they say that California is the land of opportunity. And that was really true for Zach Gutin. He was formerly the VP of Sales at Final Draft, which is a screenwriting software company. And from that experience, he has been able to become the founder of ThinkAlike, which is a cold outreach B2B hyper-targeted email campaign service. In today's episode, Zach tells us that selling in the movie industry is different, and yet in many regards the same as selling in any other industry. It's all about understanding the buyer, serving with excellence in a way that they judge, in a way that they value, how to connect with people, how to build relationships, and staying away from a transactional mindset. That's what we're going to talk about today. And so, with no further ado, let's get to it.
Yeah.
Welcome, Zach. Are you ready to babble?
I'm ready to babble. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm really excited to have you on here. Where are you at right now?
I'm in Los Angeles, California.
I thought so. You started out as a screenwriter.
Yeah. I my career started. I was an intern in college for a company called Script Magazine, which was a publication by and for screenwriters, and I had ambitions of writing myself, and that's really where my career got started, was right there, and kind of growing with that company, which kind of led to many other exciting roles.
I think the interesting thing about screenwriters, to a certain degree, they're sellers too, right? You have to sell to your audience, to the reader, but you also got to sell to producers.
It's a great point. Yeah. You think of it as a pitch, whether it's a product pitch or you're coming in to pitch a story, you really have to sell that. And, with the investment that goes into any film and the likelihood that a film becomes profitable, which is very slim, you can imagine how strong a pitch has to be to get someone to start opening up their wallets. So definitely there's a great deal of salesmanship that goes into pitching a project just to get it produced or even to get hired for it. But then, to your point, then your story itself is really sort of selling an audience on the characters and the adventure they're going on. And I think there's elements of that, both the verbal pitch and what you're doing in your writing, that apply to a lot of other fields.
Yeah. So did this come natural for you?
I've always been a writer. I've always felt I've had a way with words. I've been able to get reactions out of people with things that I've written, going back to being a kid and in school, getting reactions out of teachers and winning poetry contests and things like that. And then when I started my career, realizing that I had a way with words when it came to things like emails, where I could get people to respond to me who seemed otherwise sort of unreachable. I just had a way about it, and not completely on my own. I think a lot of it came naturally, but I also picked up little tips and tricks along the way from people. I was always very adaptable in that way, and found that the smarter I got about it, the more I learned from other people, the more I could continue to apply what did come naturally to me, which was sort of wordsmithing, and now to the way that ThinkAlike runs, and the way we utilize email marketing as sort of the engine of our B2B sales process. As I say to clients, it really all comes down to what we're saying and the language of those campaigns. The mechanics are important, and the campaigns can't succeed without sound mechanics. But really, the effectiveness of drawing in leads and getting people interested in a product or a service comes down to what we say to them in those emails, and the tone that we strike. Not just that there's good information coming across, but that we're being very conversational. And that definitely comes back to screenwriting, because when I sit down to write a campaign for a client, one of the first things that I'm thinking of is sort of drawing a scene, creating a scene and a framework of, okay, this prospect that I want to reach is standing across the room from me. We're at a networking party. How do I start that conversation? What would that sound like? Which is a lot like what you do when you're creating dialogue between characters. What would they say naturally to one another? How would this conversation go? And that's what we're trying to do with email marketing, so that it doesn't come across spammy and shallow. We want these to be our campaigns to be very engaging and warm and friendly. And so I think of that as a conversation. And I find it, if people think about that context of, you can start a conversation by just walking up to someone, and how really that can be pretty easy as long as you walk up to someone and are fairly friendly and kind of give them a reason to talk to you. Most people are pretty open to that. Whereas in an email that comes across very heavy in marketing languages, they're very quick to turn it away. So trying to find, okay, how can we apply that conversational approach in our writing, which very much is something that screenwriters do.
When you first started, getting gigs as a screenwriter, what was the selling process part of that like? What was the process that you went through in order to get a new gig?
Well, there's definitely a proving yourself on the page part of it. There's, you've got to show that you can execute character and plot. But to get a gig, to really convince someone that they want to work with you, you do end up really selling yourself. And both in terms of professionalism, you want someone to believe in you and believe that they can trust in you and that there's accountability. You're going to meet deadlines. You're going to provide a quality of work that's akin to the work they've seen to that point. You need to see the professionalism from a writer as you would an entrepreneur to know that's good. That's constructive feedback, even though it might sting for a moment. You can take that and grow with that. And so I think in terms of getting hired as a writer, that's the type of thing that studios and networks and producers are looking for. It's the industry, while it may seem very large, the decision makers with the industry is a fairly select pool of people. So to win them over means you're up against a lot of people who would like to have them read your scripts.
I think that would be the hard part. And I think a lot of the listeners can identify with that because they're promoting products and services and things like that to people. And all they want to do is try to get a foot in the door so people could take a look at what they have. In your case, you're just trying to get, a script in front of them so they would read it and actually have them open it up.
Yeah.
That's got to be huge.
Oh, it's enormous. Well, I mean, even, and this is where I think writers who mature a bit will kind of reach this point of, when you're getting feedback from someone, even if it is that they're not just glowing. And by the way, most of the time, that's not the feedback that you get. Most of the time, there's something that needs to be improved. You'll hear the phrase all the time, there's no such thing as a final draft. And to a degree that is true. I think it's Lorne Michaels, executive producer of Saturday Night Live, who speaks to the way that their show is produced and how fast it has to be produced each week, that it's never really done. It's just time to go live. And so I think that's true. It's kind of true of every film as well. Obviously films have a lot more time to deal with. It's not just, a week of production, but there is this element of like, there's always improvements that could be made. And now it's time to let it out into the world. And from a writer's standpoint of trying to get seen, knowing that just getting that feedback from somebody is very valuable. You've won to a degree. You've won that milestone, at least in the process of the growth of a writer. So there is, for writers, the numbers really are like 1 in 100. Like if you ask 100 people to read your script, the amount of people that are actually going to read it and respond to it are slim. So you've really got to have the thick skin to get through that and to appreciate the small wins along the way, those iterative wins that kind of reinvigorate you to go back out there and do it all over again. And I think that applies to any sales process, is looking at, did we close that deal? Okay, well, we would have liked to, maybe we didn't. Is there something that we learned in there? Is there other connections that we've made? Is there some other value? And I think that's really important, is kind of like taking the small wins to keep yourself going till you get to the bigger ones.
I've worked with, well, I should say this, I know a few people who have done business in Los Angeles, and they say it's I have mixed opinions on this, so maybe you can set me straight.
Sure.
People tell me that people have a very transactional kind of view that you can't really rely on anybody to do anything, because if they get a bid or gig and everybody's always selling themselves, that they'll ghost you and they'll go do some other thing. At the other time, because it seems to me films are very finite, they're not ongoing concerns like a business. That people probably who've worked together commonly will work together again on other projects. So you have these two things. You have this relationship building that you have for selling, and then you also have this kind of like this hunter thing where you just got to go a lot of places and see if something sticks. Maybe you can explain that. What's the truth here?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's funny. It was just on Twitter, for example, there's a great community of screenwriters. There's a lot of conversation, and just this, like in the last few days, even there was a sort of meme going around, or a conversation going around about the importance of developing real relationships with people. And this is especially true of somebody who's coming into the industry for the first time, because people do tend to come in expecting to get the attention. It's sort of mind-boggling sometimes that the people sort of arrive in Hollywood thinking that Hollywood hasn't found them yet, and so that they're the great solution we've all been looking for, and everybody should pay close attention to them. And then what starts to break them is that doesn't really go their way, and they start to get desperate. And in getting desperate, they start to get very transactional, where they're just looking to get someone to read the script. They're just looking to get someone to introduce them. They're just looking for, but they're not willing to take the time to really develop those relationships. And I think when you look across the most successful people in the industry, one of the things that makes them so successful is that ability to collaborate. So that definitely there is this propensity to be transactional, and I think it forms out of desperation. And if you take a different approach where you try to remain open-minded to what they're doing, you never fall into that desperation, and instead you have insights and perhaps some sort of intelligent conversation to be had.
Right. How did you come to this realization? Was it from some mistakes that you made, or was it from something some mentor taught you?
Well, I have an interesting upbringing. My family moved a lot when I was a kid. We moved about 12 times before I reached high school. In fourth grade, I was in 3 different schools in 1 year. Not a military brat, just had very loving parents who were maybe a little sporadic in their decision making, and we would move one place and it wouldn't be a good idea. We'd wind up moving somewhere else. So in one sense, that was very challenging, and there are certainly memories and things from childhood that are sort of frustrating. But as I've gotten older, the thing that I've realized that I really gained from that is the ability to approach new relationships, because I was constantly making new friends, and to learn that, how do you make yourself fit into an equation, and so back to the way that somebody can become insightful as to who their targets are and what they're looking for, both in the filmmaking world and others, is to look across at the person you're trying to talk to and determine what's of interest to them. And as a kid, it was like, well, okay, who are the kids that love baseball? I love baseball. So if I find the kids who like baseball, I can talk to them about baseball. And that sort of same thing has really benefited me my entire career, of just like, who are the people that are into the things that I'm into? How can I find my way into a relationship with those people? And obviously, when I got to Los Angeles, I found, in fact, even before I got to Los Angeles, I had come out here for work a couple of times and got a sense of the creative community here, which I hadn't seen anywhere else, that I'd lived, or certainly not in my adult life, where I was really kind of starting to focus my career path on being creative, and realized, like, wow, there's this whole world here in Los Angeles where everybody's interested, give or take. Everybody is interested in kind of what I'm interested in, and definitely, give or take. My wife is a teacher. It's always funny when we get together with friends, which hasn't happened in a year, but get together with people, or you meet meet friends and they'll ask like, well, what do you do? What do you do? And my wife answering that she's a second grade teacher is like this breath of fresh air to so many people, because everyone else in Los Angeles has the similar answer of like, I'm a producer, I'm a writer, I'm a musician, and so it's nice to hear from someone who's just like, oh, I work in insurance, or I work in something else. But definitely there's a community here, and I found that, and I was so excited about it, because in this town you've got to sort of respect that everybody's got a skill, everybody's got a talent, and the industry will kind of decide who's the most talented. But it for me, that ability to recognize like where I stand within a group of people, and how to find my people, really stems from just being a kid who moved around a lot. And as an adult, trying to be respectful of other people's times, and making sure that if I'm going to try to pursue somebody, if I'm going to try to pursue their time, that I better really have a good reason for it. And that has been something that was a big part of pursuing a career in screenwriting, and with Think Alike Media, the way that we pursue prospects for our clients is really built into that same sort of thinking of like, let's not target people who might be the right fit. Let's target people where we know that we're the right fit, because then there's going to be conversation to be had.
And does Think Alike Media, it doesn't sell just to the entertainment industry, right?
Yeah, when we first started, we were hyper focused on the entertainment industry. I had grown within a company called Final Draft. Final Draft makes a software that is really the dominant brand in a tiny niche. That niche is screenwriting software. They were acquired by Script Magazine, and that's how I wound up in Los Angeles. Really, was they bought the company, and part of the deal was that there was going to have to be one person that came from Script Magazine out to LA to be here on the ground. Script Magazine was 5 people. 4 of them were all related, and I was the 5th person. So when it came time for someone to leave the East Coast to come and work in LA for Final Draft, there was really no choice. It was going to be me. And I was perfectly happy to be 22 years old and being moved out to Los Angeles on the dime of another company. And so it was a very exciting time. And then Final Draft, I grew within the company. I was initially the director of studio relations, and was selling to TV studios and networks and film studios all over the world, not just in LA and New York, and but Europe and elsewhere. And when I predate the SaaS model. So Final Draft, as a software product in terms of its enterprise offering, was sold license by license, as opposed to some big like subscription like now is much more common. And so at the time, that's how we were doing it. And I was in a position where selling to the studios and the networks, I started to get these whispers in my ear from my buyers that were saying, hey, this SaaS modeling is starting to happen with other companies. And they weren't talking about competitors of ours. They were talking about other ancillary products. And they were saying, we just like this option, because even though they were paying more in the subscription model, it gave them an ease of use that they didn't have to just install one license at a time. And so at Final Draft, I sort of heard that enough times to internalize it. And it took about a year to convince our CEO to make that change, because unlike Adobe, which was a very early SaaS mover, they had very deep pockets. I think something like $8 billion in annual revenue. And for them to make a pivot in their price model, they had deep enough pockets to weather any storms that came from that Final Draft. Being a dominant brand, but in a very niche industry, we didn't have that sort of resources. And so that change, convincing our CEO to change our price model for the way we sold to studios, was, I mean, I almost got fired a couple of times in pushing for that. And ultimately, though, it was the reason that the company went from having been sniffed for acquisition previously by big companies, major brands. And in 2015, the company was acquired for about $24 million. And when that happened, I decided that rather than staying on and working with a much larger company, I had, again, always come from very small teams with Script Magazine, and Final Draft was about 30 people. The company that bought them was about 4,000 people. And so I wasn't interested in going and working for a much bigger company like that. I realized it was the point in my career to start my own company. And so I did, and sort of brought the same expertise in the way that we were selling Final Draft ultimately, I was primarily working with companies in media and entertainment technology. But over the last 3 years, several companies in technology, in other industries completely, have found us because of our success stories and case studies that we've had. And so now we've been able to serve companies in a lot of different industries that I could have told you absolutely nothing about when I started with those clients. And it's really been a testament to our process working across a variety of different fields.
Who's your ideal client?
Our ideal client is a company that is either in an early phase and is trying to establish business to business sales. We don't necessarily work with a lot of companies that have a consumer market unless they want to do that through an affiliate program, or they have had a sales track record but are starting to feel it flatline.
If people want to get a hold of you, Zach, how would they do that?
The website is thinkalikemedia.com. So if you think of great minds, think alike. So thinkalikemedia.com. And we've got a submission form right on the page.
Awesome. Any place else?
You can follow me on Twitter at Zach Gutin, ZackGutin.
And is there good stuff on your Twitter feed?
Yeah, my Twitter feed is definitely a combination of screenwriting, filmmaking. We'll touch on business as well. There's also a Think Alike Media Twitter account where we share success stories from our clients, really kind of as they're happening. So if we close a deal on a given day, we usually try to have our social team get something up that day. So it's kind of fun to share in real time the successes of our clients.
Awesome. All right, Zach. Hey, thanks a bunch for visiting here in Sales Babble. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate this opportunity.
When you send an email to a customer, it's easy to kind of be authentic, right? You know exactly what to say and you know how to be you. But when you're trying to write emails for a bunch of people, like a marketing email campaign, trying to make those emails look hyper-specific, like you wrote it directly for that one person, that's a whole different thing. So this idea of taking the model of the screenplay, like what Zach's talking about, and setting a scene and thinking about the characters and the dialogue going between the characters, I can't help but think that if we could employ those kinds of skills into our email marketing campaigns, it would be easy to convert them into prospective clients. It's really an interesting idea of what Zach's doing here at Think Alike. Super interesting. If you'd like to connect with him, I've got links in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com. You can connect with Zach there. And if you have any questions about this episode, don't hesitate to reach out and connect. And you can do that also on the homepage at the Babble Me button. If you found value in this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. That's all we've got for this week. Until next week, folks, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.